My parents sent my brother a bill for the years he lived at home after he moved out in anger. I don't even know where to begin with this, but I feel like I'm going to explode if I don't get it out. I need an outside perspective because I think my family has finally completely lost its mind, and I might have just destroyed it for good. To understand what happened, you have to understand my family. I'm Camila, 24F, and until recently, my brother Mateo, 26me, and I lived with our parents, Alvaro and Beatriz, in Madrid. We live in one of those old apartment buildings where the walls are made of paper and secrets have a shorter shelf life than milk. You can hear Doña Elvira from 3B arguing with her husband about garlic, and you know for a fact that she can hear my mother sighing dramatically whenever a bill comes in the mail. This building, this community, is my parents' entire world. Their reputation among the neighbors is more important to them than anything. And I mean anything. Because of this, our family was never really a family. It was a brand. The product we were selling was success. My parents' core belief, the foundation of their entire worldview, is that money is the only real measure of a person's worth. Respect, love, happiness, it all came down to your bank account. Every single thing in our lives was filtered through that lens. When I was a kid and got good grades, it was never, "We're so proud of your hard work." It was always, "Keep this up and you can be a doctor." Do you know how much doctors make? When Mateo got his first engineering job, my father didn't ask if he was excited or nervous. The first words out of his mouth, before even a congratulations, were, "What's the salary?" Every achievement was immediately converted into its monetary value. Even affection was transactional. Gifts weren't gifts. They were investments in the family image. For my 20th birthday, they bought me this expensive, professional-looking watch. I'm not a watch person. I wear a cheap fitness tracker. But I understood. It was so that when we had the whole building over for drinks, my mother could grab my wrist, show it off to the neighbors, and say, "Look what we got Camila, an investment in her future." It wasn't a present for me, it was a prop for her performance. It made my stomach turn. Every hug felt like it came with a price tag. Every "I love you" felt conditional on me contributing to the facade of the perfect, prosperous family. We weren't, home. We were a carefully curated image for public consumption. And for years, my brother and I played our parts. I just never realized how much it was costing him. That perfect, prosperous image? It was a house of cards, and for the last few years, my brother Mateo was the one desperately holding it all together from the inside, making sure no one on the outside saw it tremble. His contributions weren't just helpful, they were the foundation of the lie. I remember this one winter, maybe 2 years ago. Dad's contracting business had hit a rough patch, and the air in our apartment was thick with a cold, silent anxiety. I heard my parents whispering in the kitchen, their voices low and sharp. The electricity bill was overdue, with a final notice printed on bright red paper sitting on the counter like a tiny bomb. My father, Alvaro, was just staring at it, his shoulders slumped. He looked smaller, deflated. That's when Mateo came home from work. He didn't even have to ask what was wrong. He saw the red paper, saw my father's face, and just walked over to his wallet. He pulled out the exact amount in cash, plus a little extra, and placed it on the counter next to the bill. He didn't say, "Here, I'll help." He just said, "There you go." My father didn't look at him. He just picked up the money, folded it, and put it in his pocket. The only thing my mother, Beatriz, said was, "Not a word of this to anyone, you understand? Especially not to your Tia Sofia." Tia Sofia is her sister, the one she's in constant, unspoken competition with. There was no, "Thank you, Mateo." No, "We appreciate you." Just a command to maintain the secret, to protect the brand. Mateo just nodded, this exhausted look on his face, and went to his room. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't a one-time thing. It became a pattern, an unspoken system. I'd come home from my classes and see the refrigerator, which had been depressing and empty that morning, suddenly full of fresh fruit, meat, and cheese. Mateo had gone grocery shopping on his way home from work. Again. He never announced it. He'd just quietly unpack everything while my mother hovered nearby, arranging it all just so. She'd be relieved, you could see it in her eyes, but her posture was always tense, like she was afraid a neighbor would pick that exact moment to knock on our door and see the evidence of our need. The evidence of his generosity. It was his sacrifice, but it was their shame. And then there was the cash. I saw it happen more times than I can count. My mother would be complaining about some unexpected expense, a broken washing machine, a copay for a doctor's visit, and it was always a performance. Loud enough for Mateo to hear, but phrased like she was just thinking out loud. A few hours later, I'd see him corner her in the hallway when he thought I wasn't looking. He'd discreetly press a folded bundle of euros into her hand. She would take it without making eye contact, her fingers closing around it instantly, and give a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It was like watching a spy movie, a clandestine exchange of secrets. The money would disappear into her purse, and the topic would never be mentioned again. Every single time, the transaction was followed by the family mantra. We don't air our dirty laundry. This is a private matter. Your father would be mortified if anyone knew. They took his money, they needed his money, but they resented him for the fact that he was in a position to give it. His success, which they publicly bragged about to the neighbors, was a private source of humiliation for them. His help wasn't a gift. In their eyes, it was his duty. It was the tax he paid for living under their roof, the price of admission for being their son, and they were cashing every single check. The breaking point came about a month ago. It wasn't one big, dramatic explosion, but a slow-burning fire that finally consumed the whole house. Dad started picking at Mateo about a weekend trip he was planning with his friends. Must be nice to have so much disposable income, he said, dripping with sarcasm, while Mateo was just trying to eat his breakfast. Mateo, who had just paid for the new water heater without being asked, finally snapped. He didn't even raise his voice. It was worse. It was cold. It is, he said, looking Dad dead in the eye. I work for it, and a lot of it ends up in this house. So yes, I will spend what's left on myself. The fight that followed was the ugliest I have ever witnessed. My father roared about disrespect, about living under his roof. My mother jumped in, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt, talking about everything they'd sacrificed for us. Mateo just stood there and took it, until he finally said quietly but with absolute finality, I'm done. He went to his room, and for the next hour, the only sounds in the apartment were the scrape of a suitcase on the floor and the quiet, methodical opening and closing of drawers. When he walked out, he didn't look at any of us. The click of the front door locking behind him felt like a gunshot in the silence. The week that followed was a masterclass in denial. My parents acted like he'd just gone on a long holiday. They'd talk about the news, the weather, what Doña Elvira was cooking that smelled so good. But the silence was a living thing in the apartment. It was heavy and suffocating. Every clink of a fork against a plate was deafening. They were trying to project an image of stoic control, of parents who had rightfully disciplined an ungrateful son. But I could see the cracks. I saw my father staring at Mateo's empty chair at the dinner table. I heard my mother crying softly in the bathroom when she thought I was asleep. Then, about a week after he left, they sat me down in the living room. They had this strange, triumphant gleam in their eyes that made my skin crawl. Camila, my father started, puffing out his chest. Your mother and I have been thinking. We've come up with a very fair and modern solution to teach Mateo about real-world responsibility. My mother was nodding along, a tight, proud smile on her face. It's a teachable moment, she chimed in. My father turned his laptop toward me. On the screen was a freshly sent email to Mateo. The subject line read, Invoice 001, Outstanding Familial Contributions. Attached was a crisp, professional-looking PDF. My blood went cold. I leaned in, and my vision tunneled as I read the line items. They had created an itemized invoice for every single expense they had incurred for him, from his 18th birthday to the day he moved out. It was all there, calculated to the last cent. There was retroactive rent for room 2, 96 months or $250 a month, for a room he'd lived in his whole life. There was a section for utility and internet overages, estimated. They even billed him for his share of groceries for 8 years, the same groceries he had so often bought for the entire family. But it was the last line item that made the air leave my lungs. It was the one that felt like a physical slap. Under the miscellaneous section, in cold black type, it read, Maternal Emotional Labor and Life Guidance, 2,920 days, are at a nominal rate. They had billed my brother for our mother's love. They had put a price tag on parenthood and sent him the bill. The grand total at the bottom was for tens of thousands of euros. They weren't teaching him a lesson. They were punishing him for escaping. They were trying to monetize their own son. I just stared at the screen. For a full minute, I don't think I breathed. My ears were ringing, a high-pitched whine that drowned out my father's proud, expectant breathing next to me. The words on the invoice blurred together into a meaningless soup of cruelty. Maternal emotional labor. The phrase echoed in the ringing silence of my mind. They had weaponized motherhood. They had taken the one thing that should have been unconditional and stamped a price on it like a slab of meat at the butcher's. A wave of nausea rolled through me, hot and acidic. I felt a deep, gut-wrenching shame, so profound it was like I was the one who had written it. These were my parents. This was my blood. My first impulse, the one drilled into me since birth, was to smooth it over. To say something neutral, to not start a fight, to protect the fragile peace of our home. But my loyalty to Matteo, my kind, quiet, generous brother, was like a live wire inside me. He had literally kept the lights on in this apartment, and this was his reward. A bill for existing. I felt my hands start to tremble, not from fear, but from a rage so pure and so hot it felt like it was going to melt my bones. I looked from my father's smug face to my mother's self-satisfied smile, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see my parents. I saw two strangers, two cruel, petty accountants who had just audited their own son's heart and found it lacking. I mumbled something about needing to study and fled to my room before I said something I couldn't take back. For the rest of the day, I was trapped in that internal war. The ingrained fear of my father's temper wrestled with this new, savage need to defend my brother. Every time I thought about confronting them, I could already hear my mother's voice, thick with tears, accusing me of being ungrateful, of taking his side. It was their favorite tactic, a form of emotional blackmail I'd been subjected to my whole life. Stay quiet. Keep the peace. Don't ruin the image. The final straw came that evening. I was in my room, the door slightly ajar, when I heard my mother talking in the hallway just outside our front door. It was our neighbor, Senora Diaz, the building's unofficial gossip columnist. My mother's voice was sickly sweet, dripping with false modesty. "Oh, yes, it was a difficult decision," she sighed dramatically, loud enough for half the floor to hear. "But Alvaro and I believe in tough love. Children these days need to understand the value of things." I crept to the door, my heart pounding in my throat. I couldn't believe she was talking about this. To her. "We sent him a formal invoice for his expenses since he turned 18, my mother continued, her voice swelling with pride. "Rent, food, everything. A parent's job is to prepare them for the real world. We feel this was the final push he needed to finally, truly become a man." That was it. The click of the neighbor's door closing was like the starting pistol for my rage. The humiliation was suffocating. She wasn't just cruel, she was boasting about it. She was using this monstrous act as another prop in her performance of the perfect, savvy parent. A sharp, coppery taste filled my mouth, like I'd bitten my tongue. My vision narrowed. The fear I'd felt all day vanished, burned away by the white-hot fury that took its place. They hadn't just sent an invoice, they had turned Matteo's entire existence into a public spectacle for their own ego. In that moment, standing in the dark of my room, listening to my mother hum as she walked back into the living room, a cold, hard resolve settled over me. It wasn't just about defending Matteo anymore. This was about justice. They wanted to play with numbers. They wanted to turn family into a balance sheet. Fine. Game on. I was going to become the auditor of this family, and I was going to find every last receipt for their hypocrisy. That night, I didn't sleep. I just lay in bed, my mother's bragging words echoing in my ears, and let the rage sharpen into a plan. If they wanted to play business, I would become the most ruthless auditor they had ever seen. My mission was simple. Find proof. Find every cent Mateo had ever poured into this black hole of a family and hold it up to the light. I started with what I had direct access to, my own phone. I spent hours scrolling through years of WhatsApp conversations with Mateo. It was painful, like picking at a scab. I found dozens of messages. Hey, can you grab milk and bread on your way home? Mom's purse is empty again. Followed by my reply, done. Did you get the money for the internet bill? And his response, a simple thumbs up emoji. Each one was a tiny paper cut. I screenshotted everything. I found a text from last year where I asked him if he could lend me $50 for textbooks, and he replied, just sent it. Don't tell mom and dad, you know how they get. He was protecting me from their financial lectures while simultaneously keeping them afloat. The hypocrisy was staggering. The next phase was riskier. A physical search. I waited until they went out for their mid-morning coffee with the neighbors. A sacred ritual. The moment the front door clicked shut, I was moving. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I started in the living room in the old wooden secretary desk where my mother kept important documents, which was mostly a chaotic jumble of old birthday cards and expired warranties. I dug through piles of paper, my hands getting dusty. I found a few receipts for big grocery shops tucked into an old cookbook, paid for with Mateo's debit card. Bingo. I took photos of them, the timestamp on my phone's camera acting as my evidence log. The real prize, I knew, was in my father's study. It was his little kingdom, and the main desk drawer was always locked. It's where he kept the real bills, the bank statements, the things he didn't want my mother to worry about, or more accurately, the things he didn't want the world to see. I tried to jimmy the lock with a paperclip, my hands clumsy and sweaty. It was useless. I felt a surge of frustration. My mother almost caught me a few days later. I was helping her clean, and I casually asked if she'd seen the latest statement from the electric company. Her face immediately clouded over. Her eyes welled up with tears, a switch flipped with practiced ease. "Why are you asking, Camila?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Are you saying I can't manage things? After everything your father and I do for you? For this family? It's just so much pressure." She sank onto the sofa and put her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, performative sobs. It was a masterclass in manipulation. I was the bad guy for asking a simple question. I immediately backed off, mumbling an apology, but inside, that cold fury was solidifying into ice. She wasn't just hiding the truth, she was using her tears as a shield. The breakthrough came from pure dumb luck. My mother uses an ancient shared family laptop that sits in the corner of the living room. It's slow and clunky, but she uses it for her emails and recipes. She'd been emailing with her sister and had walked away to answer the phone, leaving her email account wide open. I saw my chance. My hands were shaking as I typed Mateo's name into her search bar. What I found made my blood run cold. It wasn't just a few emails. It was an entire thread from about 3 years ago, stretching over several months. The subject line was chillingly simple: loan for dad. I clicked it open. The emails were from Mateo to our mother. The first one read, "Mom, here is the first transfer as we discussed. Please make sure this goes directly to Dad's business account. Let me know when it's safe." Attached was a bank transfer confirmation. The amount made me gasp. It wasn't a few hundred euros. It was $5,000. I kept scrolling. There was another one a month later. And another after that. Over 4 months, my brother had transferred a total of $20,000 to my mother's personal account, money that was then funneled secretly to our father to save his failing business. The same business my father used as a symbol of his self-made success. The same man who just had a screaming fit about Mateo living under his roof. It all clicked into place. The hushed arguments, the constant stress, the bad months that seemed to last for years. Mateo hadn't just been helping with bills. He hadn't just been buying groceries. He had single-handedly bailed them out of a catastrophic failure, saving them from the one thing they feared more than death: public humiliation. He had saved their precious image, and they had repaid him with an invoice for his own childhood. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of the table. I wasn't just an auditor anymore. I was holding a bomb. I spent the next 2 hours in a state of cold, focused fury. I saved every email as a PDF. I took crystal-clear screenshots of the transfer confirmations. I gathered the photos of the receipts from my phone. I created a new folder on the desktop, labeled it The Audit, and put everything inside. Then I hit print. Our old printer whirred to life, groaning with each page it spat out. The air in my small room started to smell like hot toner and injustice. Each sheet that landed in the tray felt heavier than the last, a tangible piece of their betrayal. When it was all done, I had a thick stack of papers. A dossier of my family's secret shame. I slid them into a plain manila folder, the kind you see in movies right before someone's life is ruined. The weight of it in my hands felt both sickening and righteous. This was the bomb. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I got out of bed and spread every single piece of paper out on my duvet. In the soft glow of my bedside lamp, my entire childhood bedroom was transformed into a war-sea room. There they were, laid out in chronological order. The grocery receipts next to the WhatsApp screenshots, the bank transfers from Mateo laid out like a timeline of deceit. A paper trail of my parents' hypocrisy, covering the floral print comforter I've had since I was 16. It was so clinical, so transactional. It looked exactly like something my father would create. And that's when the first real crack in my anger appeared. A cold wave of doubt washed over me, so intense it made me shiver. I looked at the papers, at the cold, hard numbers, and a horrifying thought surfaced. Am I becoming them? I was literally turning our family relationships into a financial ledger. I was tallying up love and sacrifice and printing it out on A4 paper, ready to be used as a weapon. All day, my rage had felt so pure, so justified. But now, in the quiet of my room, it felt different. It felt cold, calculated. I was about to walk into a family gathering and detonate this thing, intentionally, humiliating my own parents in front of everyone they cared about. What kind of person does that? Was I about to destroy the last shred of my family forever? There would be no unsaying it, no taking it back. This action would be permanent. The silence and the broken pieces would be the new normal. I sank down onto the edge of my bed, careful not to disturb the evidence. Was this really for Mateo? Or was this just for me? Was this about justice? Or was this my own cold, calculated revenge for a lifetime of feeling like a line item on their balance sheet? The thought made my stomach clench. I saw my father's face, red with fury and shame. I saw my mother's carefully constructed world crumbling around her, her face a mask of horror. And for a terrifying second, I felt a pang of pity. They were my parents. Underneath all the obsession with money and image, they were the people who taught me how to ride a bike and checked for monsters under my bed. Then my eyes landed on one of the screenshots. It was an old bank transfer confirmation from Mateo to my mother for $250. The memo line just said, "For Cammie's birthday." It was from 4 years ago for my 20th birthday, for the expensive professional-looking watch. My throat closed up. My parents hadn't bought me that investment. Mateo had. He had secretly funded their performance. They had taken his money, bought a gift that they wanted me to have, and then took credit for it in front of the entire neighborhood. They didn't just accept his help. They actively erased him from the narrative of his own generosity. The doubt vanished. The pity evaporated. It was replaced by a grim, chilling certainty. This wasn't about me stooping to their level. This was about finally making them speak the only language they understood, the language of receipts and consequences. This wasn't revenge. It was a translation. I was translating my brother's love and sacrifice into the cold, hard currency they valued above all else. I carefully gathered the papers, squared them up into a neat pile, and slid them back into the folder. The bomb was ready, and so was I. The reckoning came, as it always did in our family, at Sunday lunch. The stage was perfectly set. The smell of my mother's pollo al ajillo filled the small apartment, a familiar scent that usually meant comfort, but today smelled like gasoline. Our most important neighbors, Señora Diaz and her husband, were there. My mother was in her element, laughing a little, too loudly, refilling wine glasses, performing the role of the gracious hostess whose family was the picture of respectable success. I sat there, the manila folder a dead weight on my lap under the table, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I felt strangely calm, like the eye of a hurricane. My mother was in the middle of a story about her sister, Tia Sofia, subtly painting her as less competent, less successful. It was the perfect moment. She was at the peak of her performance, basking in the neighbors' polite attention. I stood up. The scraping of my chair was unnaturally loud in the sudden lull. 4 pairs of eyes turned to me. "I actually have something I'd like to share," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I expected. "Since we're all so close here, and since my parents believe in transparency and teaching valuable life lessons." I pulled out the folder. Inside, I had separated the documents into 4 neat stacks. I walked around the table, my movement so deliberate. I placed 1 stack in front of Señora Diaz and her husband. I placed 1 in front of my mother and 1 in front of my father. I kept the last one for myself. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rustle of paper as they hesitantly picked up the top sheets. I saw Señora Diaz's eyes widen as she scanned a bank transfer. I saw my father's face drain of all color, his fork clattering onto his plate. My mother just stared at the first page, a screenshot of the invoice they had, sent Mateo, her proud smile frozen and then slowly crumbling. I returned to my seat and looked directly at them. "You sent Mateo an invoice for his existence," I said, my voice low but carrying in the dead air. "So I thought it was only fair to conduct a full audit of his contributions to this household. You know, for the sake of real-world responsibility." I let them read for another 30 seconds. I watched my father's hands start to tremble as he flipped through the pages, seeing the proof of the $20,000 loan that had saved his business. I watched my mother's face contort into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror as she saw the text messages, the receipts, the evidence of her secret financial reliance on the son she had just publicly shamed. Then I picked up my own copy. "I've tallied it all up," I announced to the room. "The secret loans to save Dad's business, the countless grocery bills, the cash for utilities, the money for my own birthday presents that you took credit for, the grand total of Mateo's documented financial support over the last 5 years comes to $38,450. I let the number hang in the air, a weapon in itself. My parents just stared at me, speechless, their faces a mixture of shock and fury. I looked my father dead in the eye. "Your invoice to him was for $26,800, so if we're billing, you owe him." The snap was instantaneous. My father lunged across the table, snatching the papers from my mother's hands and his own. His face was a terrifying shade of crimson. He didn't yell. He didn't say a word. He just balled the papers into a tight, crumpled ball, threw his napkin onto his half-eaten chicken, and stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door so hard a picture frame rattled on the wall. My mother started to speak, her voice a high, reedy whimper. "This is a lie. A misunderstanding. She's twisting things." But her voice trailed off as she looked at Señora Diaz, who was staring at her with wide, unblinking eyes, a universe of judgment in her gaze. The performance was over. Her audience was gone. She just slumped in her chair, utterly defeated. That night, my parents withdrew the invoice. Mateo got a text message, which he forwarded to me. It just said, "Bill canceled. We apologize for the misunderstanding." It was cold, corporate, and completely devoid of any real emotion. It was the most my parents have ever sounded like themselves. The relationship is shattered. There's a wall of silent, icy rage between us now. I haven't spoken to them since that lunch, and they haven't tried to speak to me. The brand is broken. The image is ruined, and I was the one who took the match to it. So, Reddit, I have to know. AET for publicly humiliating my parents with their own financial history to force them to cancel the cruel and absurd bill they sent my brother?